Hello and good evening. I'm not sure I'm coming through. I hope so. All right. It's my pleasure to introduce our presenter for tonight. Her name is Janet Hess. Janet received her BS in education from Bowling Green State University. She has an MS in education from Wright State University. Her career includes teaching high school and junior high school English and social studies for 36 years. She has substituted for an additional 12 years. Since joining Delta Kappa Gamma, Janet has served her chapter as president and has served on several committees at the state level. She is currently chair of the Personnel Committee. Her presentation tonight is about extended borders, the territories of the United States. I'll now turn the program over to Janet. Please welcome Janet Hess of Beta Psi chapter.
Hello, everybody. Let me see if I can get this screen sharing thing to work.
Got it. I see
Aha.
it. Yep, you've got it.
It works. Yay. Okay, I told you a few minutes ago that we were going to start with a pretest. So here are the questions for our pretest. How many territories does the United States have? Do any of them want to become states? If so, how many? And are any of them on the road to statehood at this time? Hannah, do you have a question? Okay. All right, are we ready to see how well you did on your pretest? There are 16 territories of the United States. Are any of them, or do any of them want to become states? Yes, one, as of this year. Are any on the road to becoming states? Well, the one is on the road. It started the process. Another one could ask for statehood at any time. Does anyone know the name of the territory that is on the road to statehood? Ah, you're going to find out. Okay. The United States has, let's go back. Okay. The United States has 5 major territories and 11 minor outlying territories. The major ones are Puerto Rico, Guam, the Virgin Islands, American Samoa, and the Northern Marianas Islands. The minor island territories include Baker Island, Jarvis Island, Kingman Reef, Wake Island, Howland Island, Midway Atoll, Palmyra Atoll, all of those are in the Pacific, and Navassa Island, Serranilla Island Bank, and Bajo Nuevo Island Bank, all in the Caribbean Sea. Serranilla and Bajo Nuevo ownership is in dispute, as they are also claimed by Colombia and Nicaragua. Control of Navassa Island is in dispute with Haiti, and control of Wake Island is disputed with the Republic of the Marshall Islands. We acquired these territories at different points in time for different reasons. The Caribbean islands of Navassa, Serranillo, and Bajo Nuevo were acquired in the early 1800s for the guano found on them. At the time, nitrogen-rich guano was a major ingredient in fertilizers. Hawaii, Guam, Puerto Rico, and the Philippines were acquired in the 1890s as a result of annexation because of the sugar and pineapple producers, and this applies to Hawaii, and the treaty ending the Spanish-American War, as in the case of Puerto Rico, Guam, and the Philippines. We acquired these territories as a way to show how powerful the United States had become. Their acquisition was part of the second age of imperialism in the late 1800s. The Philippines received its independence in 1946, and Hawaii became the 50th state in 1959. Part of the Virgin Island chain became a US possession in 1916 when we purchased it from Denmark as a way to watch over and protect the entrance to the Panama Canal. American Samoa became a US possession in 1900. We wanted it as a refueling port for our Navy. The Northern Marianas was granted to the United States as a United Nations Trust territory after World War II. When the UN did away with the trust territory system in the 1980s, the northern part of the Marianas chain voted to remain with the United States. We acquired these territories because of their strategic importance for United States military and commercial interests. They served as refueling stations, plantations for important commodities, sources for resources, and for control of the seas. Why do we hold on to them today? We can claim 12 miles off the coast of each territory. This is important for shipping lanes, fishing rights, and undersea mining rights. From them, we can keep an eye on the surrounding area. In the Pacific, they enable us to keep an eye on China. In the Caribbean, if you notice from the map, they are on some of the major shipping routes between Colombia and Venezuela and the United States. And they enable us to keep track of possible drug shipments into the country. What is the legal status of these territories and the people who live on them? The Constitution has given Congress power over the territories. All except Puerto Rico are administered by the Office of Insular Affairs in the Department of the Interior. Puerto Rico is under the Puerto Rico Federal Affairs Administration. The territories are either incorporated or unincorporated. I will be using these terms throughout the presentation, so you may want to jot down these 4 definitions. Incorporated means the territories are considered fully a part of the United States and all federal laws apply. Only one of the minor outlying islands is incorporated, and that is Palmyra Island. It became incorporated with the Hawaii group when they received incorporation, but when Hawaii was admitted as a state, Palmyra was not included in the list of islands in the Hawaiian chain, so it still remains a territory. Unincorporated means that some, but not all, of the US Constitution applies. The US Congress has oversight and veto power over everything, and the territory is not on equal terms with the states and is not on the road to statehood. All inhabited territories are unincorporated. Also, all territories are either organized or unorganized. Organized means they have passed an organic act or a territorial constitution. Unorganized means there is no territorial constitution. American Samoa and most of the minor outlying islands are unorganized and unincorporated. Guam and the US Virgin Islands are organized and unincorporated. Both Puerto Rico and the Northern Marianas have Commonwealth status. The term Commonwealth means they are an area that is self-governing under a constitution of its adoption and whose right of self-government will not be unilaterally withdrawn by Congress. In general, they have more autonomies than the other territories. However, a recent Supreme Court decision has called into question Commonwealth status. And so there are going to be some issues that come up because the Supreme Court seems to have said that there is no such thing as Commonwealth status. In terms of active participation in US government, each territory elects a representative to serve them in Congress. The delegate will have an office on Capitol Hill and will participate in committee discussions. Their duties and responsibilities are similar to representatives and senators, except that they cannot vote on bills. The people of the territories cannot vote for president as they have no representation in the Electoral College. However, they can vote in primaries and choose delegates to party conventions. Young men and women in the territories can and do serve in the United States Armed Forces. They serve at higher rates than residents of any state and also have higher mortality rates. Generally, when compared to other countries in their own region, the US territories have higher incomes, better infrastructure, longer and healthier lifespans, and higher literacy. However, when compared to the citizens in the states, all of these statistics are lower. The people in the territories also have trouble maintaining their original cultural traditions. Most people in the territories see this as a major concern. They want to hold on to parts of their traditional way of life. The legal status of the territories is determined by Congress and by Supreme Court case law. The Supreme Court has decided over 24 cases dealing with the territories. Collectively, these are called the insular cases. In general, they have decided that the territories belong to the United States, but that they are not part of it. The court has said that Congress should decide what laws and parts of the Constitution do and do not apply in the territories. In Downs versus Bidwell in 1901, the court said, if those possessions are inhabited by alien races differing from us in religion, customs, laws, method of taxation, modes of thought, the administration of government and justice according to Anglo-Saxon principles may for a time be impossible. In the case of Gonzalez versus Williams in 1904, the court determined that people living in the territories that have an organic act are citizens of the US and can travel freely to and from the mainland. In 1922, in the case of Balzac versus Puerto Rico, the court stated that the Bill of Rights applies to those living in the territories. This was reiterated in 1957 in the case of Reed versus Covert, when they said that to ignore constitutional protections when they are inconvenient would undermine the concept of a written constitution. In the 1980 case of Harris versus Rosario, the court allowed the federal government to give lower federal aid to families with dependent children in the territories, saying that Congress can treat the territories differently from states so long as there is a rational basis for its actions. Are there any questions at this point? No? Okay. I am going to be discussing the major territories, the 5 major territories, and for the rest of this presentation, I'm going to start with Puerto Rico, which is the closest. Puerto Rico is the largest of the territories in both area and population. Because it was a former colony of Spain, Spanish and English are the official languages. The basis of its economy is manufacturing. This is manufacturing of pharmaceuticals, petrochemicals, textiles, and electronics. The other major part of its economy is the service industry, which includes finance, tourism, insurance, and real estate. Its per capita income is $18,600, and that is half that of the poorest state in the United States, which is Mississippi. 37% of the households in Puerto Rico get food stamps. Today, the biggest problem in the economy is the bonded debt the territory acquired after the 2008 recession. Politically, the big question is, will Puerto Rico become a state? There are several positions. One is pro-independence. These people argue that their culture is threatened by Americanization and they need independence to fight colonialism. And that as an independent country, they can get foreign investment from all over the world. The strength of this movement has increased and decreased over the years since its beginnings in the 1930s. A second position is to maintain the status quo. They argue that the present situation is not perfect, but they are better off with the US and partly on their own. They have more cultural freedom than the states and more economic opportunity than their regional neighbors. The third position favors statehood. Their argument is that Puerto Rico is dependent on the US, and with globalization coming, they are better off with the United States. With statehood, they would have more of a say in what the future brings. Every once in a while, there is a plebiscite. There was one last year in November of 2020. 52% of Puerto Rico voted in favor of statehood. Puerto Rico is the territory that is now beginning the process of becoming a state. They will need to write a new constitution. They will need to apply to Congress. And Congress may or may not grant statehood. If Puerto Rico becomes a state, it will be entitled to 5 representatives in the House and 2 senators. Which states will lose representatives? With 7 electoral votes, how will this affect the selection of the president? Acceptance of Puerto Rico as a state is not guaranteed. Recently, Mitch McConnell has stated that he is not in favor of Puerto Rico becoming a state. However, the Republican platform did say that they would support Puerto Rico's request for statehood if it ever came. What's going to happen? It's all up in the air. The Virgin Islands are located east of Puerto Rico. They are composed of 3 main islands and many smaller ones. The 3 main islands are St. Thomas, St. John, and St. Croix. The capital of Charlotte Amelia is on St. Thomas, which is the government and commercial center of the islands. For those into popular culture, St. Croix is best known as the place where Alexander Hamilton grew up. St. Thomas is best known for having the National Park of the Virgin Islands. The basis of the economy is tourism and manufacturing of distilled spirits, primarily rum. The agricultural sector declined by 2/3 after the United States took over in 1916 and has not yet recovered. The Virgin Islands import much of their food. At one point, there was an oil refinery on St. Croix. It opened in the 1960s and at one time was one of the world's 10 largest oil refineries. It was an important part of the economy, and the island's GDP dropped by 13% when it closed in 2012. The per capita income in the Virgin Islands is $13,100. The unemployment rate pre-COVID was 12%. Consumer goods on the islands are expensive. A gallon of milk can cost as much as $7. Yeah, $7. Online purchasing is difficult as retailers charge international rates. Most of them do not realize that the Virgin Islands are part of the United States. 50% of the population is employed in the tourism industry. In order to attract businesses to the area, the Virgin Islands offers a 90% reduction in income taxes to US corporations that locate there. Also, if a United States citizen earns income in the islands, the income tax is payable to the government of the Virgin Islands, not to the US Treasury. In 2010, the territory wrote a constitution, but it granted special privileges to native Virgin Islanders in terms of property taxes and eligibility to run for governor. This constitution was rejected by the local governor and the US Congress because it did not meet the equal protection under the law provisions of the US Constitution. The United States Special Commission on Decolonization has taken an interest and would like to help the Virgin Islanders determine what their future political status might be. American Samoa was acquired in 1900 as a refueling port for US ships crossing the Pacific Ocean, and the naval base at Pago Pago was an important refueling port during World War II. American Samoa is the only US territory south of the equator. Its citizens have the highest rate of enlistment in the US military and the highest casualty rate of any state or territory. The major industry is tuna fishing and canning. However, only one tuna cannery remains on the island. Both Chicken of the Sea and Starkist used to have canneries on the island, but I think only the Starkist plant remains. The other one decided to close up and move off the island. Officially, the territory has no organic act. Therefore, its residents are not citizens of the United States. They are classified as an American national, not a citizen. They come to the mainland if they come to the mainland to work, they need to get a green card. If they want full citizenship rights, they must go through naturalization proceedings. The issue of citizenship is controversial on the islands. Those who do not want citizenship say it will lead to further erosion of their traditional way of life and greater Americanization. They note that there are three parts of their cultural and political life they do not want changed. First, they have a law that limits land ownership to Samoans. If they become citizens, this would be discriminatory under the Equal Protection Clause. Secondly, they have a traditional nobility, which would be illegal under the US Constitution. Finally, the closure of roads every day during Sa, a time of daily prayer, would be illegal under separation of church and state. Some want citizenship and argue that they are already citizens because they were born in a US territory. Those who want citizenship argue that citizenship will give full access to employment and expand their ability to stand up for their rights in traditional ways. It would lead to an end of the oppression of Indigenous peoples. They say there are already legal precedents for limiting land ownership to Indigenous peoples in Alaska, Hawaii, Guam, and the Northern Marianas Islands. The case of Tuahu versus the United States was refused a hearing by the Supreme Court in 2016, and the lower court ruling that being a citizen is not an inborn right of being born in a US territory was allowed to stand. Despite this controversy, Samoans are not interested in independence. They very definitely identify themselves as Americans. The major concern of Samoans is concern over the land. They say the land is who we are. In 1900, they passed the Native Land Ordinance restricting land ownership to Native Samoans. They feel its ownership protects their culture. Almost everyone lives in villages, and almost all the island is communally owned by the village or by extended families. Each village is run by the Matthias or nobility. The Matthias are the trustees of the land, political leaders, and disseminators of information, power brokers, and law enforcement officers. They also serve in the upper house of the Samoan legislature. The island of Guam is part of the Western Pacific island group known as Micronesia. It was acquired from Spain in 1898 as part of the settlement of the Spanish-American War. The majority of the population is the indigenous Chamorros people. They passed their Organic Act in 1950 and acquired citizenship. The economy is based on US military and tourism. The military controls 1/3 of the island. There is both a naval base and an air base on the island. Through the 1950s, the military considered the entire island a military base, and no one was allowed off without security clearance. The travel ban was finally lifted in 1962. Today, the military has first dibs on the land, so development is restricted. Currently, the United States is planning to relocate 8,000 troops from Okinawa to Guam. Tourism is the other big industry. Most tourists come from Korea, China, Russia, and Japan. They visit the local amusement park, a replica of the hideout used by Shoichi Yokoi, a Japanese soldier who hid on the island after World War II for 28 years until 1972. There is also a Pacific War Museum and several memorials to World War II and a memorial to the Guanamanians who signed up to serve in Vietnam. The major issue for the majority of residents is who has control of what happens to the land, the military or civilians. Civilians would like more of a say in land use. When a McDonald's was built a few years ago, it was built on the base by base personnel. The civilians wanted it built off base with civilians as the construction crew. Didn't happen. And because it's on the base, it's kind of hard for everyone to use it. Can you imagine not being able to get a Big Mac when you wanted one? Okay, the last of the major ones is the Marianas Islands. These were granted to the United States as a trust territory by the United Nations. The Marianas became a self-governing Commonwealth territory of the US after the people voted in favor of said status in 1975. Some aspects of Commonwealth status were implemented in 1976, and full Commonwealth status came in 1986 when the UN ended the trust territory. Since 1986, the people of the Northern Marianas have citizenship in the US. Commonwealth status offers more autonomy than regular territorial status, The covenant that set up the relationship with the US has land ownership clauses that are similar to the Samoan land ownership protections. Only Chamorro and Carolinians can own land, but the land can be rented for up to 50 years by non-Indigenous people. Again, no one quite knows what the status is now that Commonwealth status has been called into question by the Supreme Court. The economy of the Northern Marianas is in decline because of several events, and there are many empty businesses, houses, shops, and factory complexes. Tourism is the main industry. Most visitors are American or Japanese. Japanese tourism declined dramatically after the depression in the Japanese economy in the 1990s. In addition to scuba diving and beautiful beaches, there are many historical sites devoted to World War II, including the memorial to the 2 atomic bombs that were brought to Tinian to be loaded onto the Enola Gay and boxcar. The other big industry is the garment industry. Garment factories opened in the 1980s. Minimum wages are lower in the territories than the US. In addition, many garment workers were imported from Bangladesh, China, and the Philippines. The garments could be sold as made in the USA, but the wages, working conditions, and living conditions were not up to mainland standards. After the program 2020 2020 did stories on the corruption and working conditions in the garment factories. And then the US Congress took an interest in what was happening in those garment factories and forced the minimum wage up and began to look closely at immigration into the islands. In 2000, the first of the factories closed and the last closed in 2009. The immigrants who came legally to work in the garment factories were grandfathered in as immigration laws changed. But if they leave to visit families back home, they will have to reapply to enter under the newer, more restrictive immigration laws. Many of them feel trapped. After 30 years, they consider the Marianas home, but they would also like to see their families again. As you can see, the territories all have similar problems and issues. The economies are suffering from lack of industry and investment. They have similar concerns over control of land by Indigenous peoples and what happens on that land. They see the advantages of remaining part of the US, but they all wonder what the future will bring. Why don't we hear very much about the territories today? Over the years, knowledge of and interest in the territories has declined. There are several reasons for this. The primary purpose of expansion in the 19th century was to show off American power. We don't need to prove ourselves today. We are a well-established world power. The insular cases added more steps to the statehood process and set into law the idea that the people living in the territories were alien and not true Americans. The US moved on to bigger battles on the world stage, and the territories went to the back burner. Congress began not to talk about them as colonialism and imperialism became bad words in international affairs, and possession of them made us look bad during the Cold War. Also, with 50 states, the nation felt complete. We had fulfilled manifest destiny and reached from sea to shining sea. As the territories faded from view, inertia and ignorance have taken over, creating more inertia and ignorance. The people in the territories are not sure about what they want, and don't want to rock the boat by demanding an end to funding disparities or asking for a change in status. As a nation, we no longer have a unifying policy on the territories. Each territory is dealt with as a separate entity. As citizens, we don't pay attention because they are not states. And as said before, it's more difficult for them to become states. Finally, most of them are so far away from the contiguous states that we don't think of them as part of the United States. In many ways, we see them as being foreign. Any questions from the group?
How did you become interested in this, to do all this research? What set you on your path?
I ran across a book done by a travel author who did not know that the United States had overseas territories. And he decided to go visit. Once he found out about them, he visited the 5 major territories and wrote a book, which I read. So that's how I became interested. And that started me on the process of doing more research.
Do you need passports to go to any of these?
I don't think so. It would probably be a good idea, especially if you're going to the Virgin Islands or to Samoa, because those 2 territories are fairly close to non-United States territories. And if you're taking a little sea voyage, you might end up in the non-American Samoas or into the British Virgins. And I think a few months before COVID, a ship, a group of tourists were taking a tour around the islands of the Virgins, and they accidentally got into British Virgin territory, and they had a hard time getting out. So I would bring your passport with you, even if you don't need it. And of course, if you go to these territories, they use US dollars. So you don't have to go into currency exchanges.
Can a resident of Samoa get a US passport?
I don't think so, because they're not citizens.
By what means would they be able to go to a foreign country then? Like, say they wanted to go to Australia or Europe or something like that. Is there some way they can get some kind of documentation or something?
Yes, there is a way they can get documentation of identifying them as citizens of American Samoa. And I think that is what they would use. Or if they do have a passport from the United States, it would not identify them as a citizen of the United States, but as a, what did I call it? It was in one of these resident, let me go back to the page. They would be identified as American nationals, not as citizens.
Oh.
Yeah. And like I said, they do need a green card, and a lot of them do come here to go to university. And a lot of them, some of them have been employed in professional football. And I'm sure that the NFL makes sure they have all the proper documentation. Melody?
When we visited the Virgin Islands, St. Thomas is one of my very favorite places in the whole wide world. If you did not have a passport, then you need a birth certificate and driver's license to enter and exit that was something that went very quickly through customs.
Mhm. Thank
Mhm.
you.
Janet,
Yes.
Howland Island is ringing a bell with me. Is that the island that Amelia Earhart supposedly crashed on? Or am I mixing that up with something else?
Nope, that is the island that she supposedly, well, she was aiming for Howland Island
Okay,
and she never got there.
okay, there is, the association is there between
Yeah.
the two.
Yes,
Okay,
there,
thank
and
you.
today it is an uninhabited island. They did keep, the government hired a group of Hawaiian boys, teenagers, to go there during World War II so that the United States could continue to claim it and to kind of guard it so that the Japanese didn't get onto it. But they brought in different groups of boys. It was like each group was there for 6 months, and then they came home and another group of Hawaiian boys went, just so the United States could still legally claim the territory. But yes, that was the one where Amelia Earhart was aiming for and didn't make it.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions?
Fran Wilhelm had a couple questions.
Fran? Fran, you want to turn your sound on?
Yeah, okay, there, hi.
Hi.
When you said some of them get federal aid and food stamps,
Yes.
I know this seems silly, but would they get like the stimulus check like some of us?
You know, I don't know.
Not probably the organic ones you were saying that are considered citizens?
Yes.
Okay.
They might not get as much because the standard of living there is lower and they don't get the same benefits, the same amount in terms of benefits that you would get in the United States.
And how many of them actually get to vote in our elections then?
They do not, they vote for their representative,
Okay.
who is a non-voting representative for Congress. They cannot vote for president. They will elect their own governor and they will elect their own territorial legislature.
So when they say that this Virgin Islands, they give their electoral votes, they're not giving them to our president?
No,
Oh,
they don't have any electoral votes.
okay. I thought some of them did. Like Puerto Rico or Virgin Islands?
None of the territories have any electoral votes.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Very good.
Do the residents of these territories pay federal income tax?
Yes.
Oh, so they're taxed without being represented.
Sounds familiar.
Yes.
Are most of
They do have that representative. They can claim that non-voting member is their representative. So Congress has a way to get, to get around it. And the representative is there to speak for their interests. If Congress is considering legislation that will affect them in some way.
Going back to the Samoa, if they have to have a visa to come into the United States, wouldn't they have to have a visa and a green card to go into other countries as well?
Green cards are to work with.
I understand that, but wouldn't they have to have that same kind of documentation or some special documentation to go into other countries as well?
Yes.
And have a good
like I
reason
said, the documentation would show that they are American nationals, but not American citizens.
Yeah, but when people travel that aren't really citizens, don't they have to have a good reason to go into a country? Like to work or to go to school or?
Okay, then they would need to apply to that country for a working visa or for a student visa.
Well, what I'm trying to say is, wouldn't it be hard for them to travel if they can't say they're a citizen of a country?
It's difficult. But if they come to the United States to go to school or to work, it's easier because they are considered American nationals.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. It would seem like it would be difficult for them to go to other countries if they can't say that they're a citizen of a country.
It is a little more difficult, yes.
Do many of the residents of the territories become American citizens?
If they come to the United States, some of them are already considered American citizens, like the Marianas Islands and the Puerto Ricans
Right.
are already American citizens. So they come in as American citizens. The others, I'm sorry, I've lost track of the question. Could you repeat it, please?
I just wondered how many of the residents of the territories actually get American citizenship for the territories where they're not considered a citizen yet.
Again, they're considered American U.S. nationals, which is a different status than citizen.
But they couldn't vote then, could they?
They could not vote. Now,
So
if
if they
someone
wanted, like-
comes from Puerto Rico to the United States and moves into New York,
Yeah.
they are considered U.S. citizens and they can register to vote in New York. But if they move back to Puerto Rico, they don't have that right.
Yeah.
And that was the issue that recently came up in that Supreme Court case that called into question Commonwealth status. It had to do with a Puerto Rican who was living in New York and was receiving veterans benefits and Social Security. Then he moved back to Puerto Rico and he continued to receive them, and someone suddenly noticed and said, hey, wait a minute, you're not entitled to these benefits anymore because you're in Puerto Rico. And he sued in federal court because they wanted him to pay back $28,000 worth of benefits. Yeah. So the Supreme Court, I read the decision, which is, in Supreme Court legalese, and it had to do with the ultimate authority was the United States Congress. And the United States Congress could, it could revoke, it could make changes. And so therefore, anyway, it called into question the whole status of Commonwealth. So there could be some changes into what's happening in terms of the territories. And Puerto Rico, by 52%, did recently ask to become a state. So they're in the process of working through the procedure that they have to go through now. Any other questions? Yes.
Janet, Carolyn Kibble, Alpha Mu, are most of the businesses or industries there, are they by the locals or are they by outside companies and entities?
Some are local and some are outside. The garment industries that on the Marianas were all outside. The oil business that I talked about in terms of the American Virgins was an American oil company that set up there for a few years. So some of them are foreign, some of them are large multinational corporations that have gone in, and some of the businesses are small businesses started by local entrepreneurs.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Other questions?
Lona has her hand up.
Lona?
Are there Delta Kappa Gamma chapters in any of the territories?
I don't know. That's a good question.
Looks like Diana knows.
Diana, do you know?
I believe in Puerto Rico, yes.
I was figuring Puerto Rico was probably the best chance, yeah. But I'm not sure about any of the others.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Anyone else?
Judy. Judy, you're muted.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. I just had a quick one. If they do become a state, then that is when they will have electoral votes. Is that correct?
That is
If they
correct.
become a state, like if Puerto Rico becomes a state, then did I hear you say earlier that they would have 5 electoral votes?
They would
Is
have
that right?
7. The electoral votes are based upon 2 for the senators and 5 for the representatives. So since Puerto Rico would be entitled to 5 representatives plus their 2 senators, they would have 7 electoral votes.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Uh-huh.
I have a question. What is Washington, D.C. considered?
Washington, D.C. is not a state either. And in fact, they are requesting statehood because the citizens of Washington, D.C. cannot vote for president either. And they're governed by Congress. They have no representation in Congress. And they can't vote for the president. So they are also in the process of asking to become a state so they can get representatives in Congress and they can get electors for the Electoral College.
So are they considered a territory or are they considered
They're
a
considered
district?
special,
It's called a district?
a special governmental district. Mm-hmm. And they are really working.
Yeah.
To get the representation that they feel that Congress doesn't do a good job.
Do you know how long they've been working on that?
How long have they been?
Do you know how long they've been working on that?
Several years, I think.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, it kind of comes and goes, but they've been really vociferous recently.
Okay, but there's no estimated time as
And
to
there's
when
no
it will start.
guarantees.
No guarantees.
And no guarantees. No.
Doesn't seem quite fair, does it?
I know. They live in the United States, yet they don't have any electoral votes for the president, and yet the president lives there, and their Congress has the final say over their laws and so forth. And yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
Janet,
Yes.
Hannah Fairbanks wants to know, have you visited any of these areas? If so, what was it like?
I have not visited any of them. And I would like to do so. But it's expensive to visit these islands. Puerto Rico and the Virgins are probably the easiest ones to visit. But you start looking at the distance to get to Samoa, Guam, and the Marianas. You first have to get to Hawaii, and then you get flights to these various other places. So I haven't been to any of them, but I would like to go. Any other questions?
And Mary Segrist Straits said that DC does have 3 electoral votes.
Oh, it does.
I don't think so. They don't have any representation. They would not have those until they became a state.
I'm just repeating
Okay,
what
I'm
was on-
reading.
I'm reading on
Oh.
Google, of course.
Okay,
Washington, D.C. has had 3 electoral votes in the election of the president and vice president of the United States and has participated in every U.S. presidential election since that time. They have voted for the candidate of the Democratic Party in every presidential election.
when did they get that right? Because they didn't always have it.
The
I'm
23rd
surprised.
Amendment gave them that right.
Yes,
According to
1961.
That's right. I keep forgetting those
But
amendments.
then they must not have a senator or a representatives then. That's what they don't have.
That's what they don't have, yeah. Mhm.
Well, Janet, look what you've done. You've got us digging deeper.
Great.
Thank you so much for your presentation. Like they say on TV, thank you for making us a little smarter.
My pleasure.
And I wanted to remind all of you, if you've not signed in for attendance, make sure you go to chat and you type in your first and last name and your chapter so that you get credit for that. If you want PDU credit, just send me an email and I'll send you a certificate of participation that you can use for tonight's session for PDU credit. And I want to remind you to watch your email for an e-blast this weekend from Kathy Tenney about next week's sessions. And you'll want to get signed up for those if you haven't already. The one on Tuesday is Canva, a 2020 version of Print Shop. And then on Thursday, integrated STEM education. So that's what's coming up next week. And Kathy Tenney will send out an e-blast so that you can sign up if you haven't already. And we really, really appreciate you spending your evening with us. And Janet, again, thank you so much for all the hard work you've done and your presentation. We enjoyed it.
Thank all of you for coming. I enjoyed the audience.
Thank you.
All of you have a good evening. See you
And
next time.
Linda and Diana, could you stay just a minute?
Absolutely.
Thank you. 1 minute. I
Okay.
promise.
Good
And
night, ladies.
Jeannie Bennett, if she's still here, tell her to stay.
Hi.
Okay, very quickly. I am signed up for all the breakouts except